Third-party content has been copied and communicated pursuant to Part 5A or 5B of the Copyright Act, unless indicated otherwise.
And I'm going to ask Tim from Cotton On to join me as well and go through the sort of Cotton On story. Twisted Kane is also here from Cotton On. I twisted Kane's arm to, he's the store BIM manager or planning manager, and so he was kind enough to put this presentation together for us, and happy to take some questions at the end. But I'll assist Tim to run through how I believe they're using it, which is extremely comprehensive, and great to see that a sort of a store or a group of companies like Cotton On is engaging in lots of technology, not just Revit, but as we'll see towards the end, there's a lot of technology they're using to streamline that process. And by way of introduction, Tim is also a Revit modeller previously at Third Ecology, and you might know that from Geelong here, and so he has a good architectural background as well. So go for it, Tim.
No worries. So yeah, my name's Tim White. I've been working at Cotton On for 2 years now. I'm just going to give a brief background on the history of Cotton On and then pass it back over to show how BIM is used within Cotton On. So basically the story of Cotton On, it originated in Geelong with our founder Nigel Austin. Back in the late 1980s, he started with a pile of acid wash jackets. Thought he'd take them down to the Beckley Park markets, so went down with a pile of jackets and handed them around, or basically let people try them on, but unfortunately left empty-handed the first time, and went back and had a chat with his dad and said, look, what do I do? And undeterred, went back the next week and dropped the price, and they sold out pretty much straight away, and it was sort of the beginning of Cotton On back then, and to see where it is now, it's pretty unbelievable, really. So in 1991, our first store opened right here in Geelong, in East Geelong, and also in Mallet Street. And this is sort of a timeline. So obviously 1988 was the Beckley Park Market, where it first started, and then into 1991, 3 years later, where the first stores opened. So we have them in Geelong, in East Geelong, and then all throughout regional Victoria. 3 years later, we're into Western Australia and all over regional Australia. And fast forward 11 years, and we are opening our first kids store. So not only are we just Cotton On, we've got Cotton On Kids as well. We've also got our distribution centre in North Geelong. A year later, we've started to go international. So we're across the Tasman and in New Zealand, and we've also opened our 100th store. So 100 stores already in quite a short time, but as you'll see quickly, it's grown a lot more since then. So a year later, we've brought along 2 more brands. So we've got Cotton On Body and Cotton On Factory, and we've also moved into Singapore, so we're starting to move into Southeast Asia. The Cotton On Foundation, I'm not sure if people are aware of what that does. So the Cotton On Foundation does a lot, not just locally in Geelong and Australia, but also internationally. So in Uganda and Manya, they are helping regional communities out there and remote communities with fresh drinking water, building basically schools, housing, and yeah, really helping there. And in Geelong, they founded Run Geelong, so you know what that does for obviously the Geelong Hospital and the Children's Ward, and also all throughout Australia. So there's Run Townsville, Run Wollongong, Run Ballarat, so it's a great foundation and a great initiative set up. Obviously, fast forward again, 2008, we are into Ruby Shoes, and we're opening mega stores. So we're putting all brands under one roof. We're also into Hong Kong, and Hong Kong DCs are popping up. 2009, so 3 years after we've opened our 100th store, we're on to 500 stores. So as you can see, in 3 years we've really upgraded. We're also into Malaysia and America, and Typo and T-Bar are now a part of the Cotton On name. The next year we're into the UAE, so again, even more international, and the following year we're into South Africa and Germany. 2012, which was my first year, we opened our 1,000th store. So again, in 3 more years, we've gone from 500 stores to 1,000 that quickly, and again, more countries popping up all the time. So just last year we opened up in 5 more countries. We had Cotton On Uni open up here in Geelong, which helps obviously staff from Cotton On to further their place within the business, so help move forward and progress. We also, Supre was also bought by Cotton On, so that now falls under the Cotton On banner. And there's now, well, as of last year, there was 19,000 employees worldwide, all under the Cotton On banner. This year already, next week we have a store opening in Brazil, and we're looking at Venezuela later in the year as well. So this is just a basic footprint of the stores that we have worldwide. As you can see, the majority are in Australia, but just across the Tasman we have a fair few in New Zealand, a lot in South Africa and North America, and in Southeast Asia it's starting to really expand as well. As our global growth numbers show, in the last 4 years, from 2010, the stores from just the Cotton On stores alone, they've doubled. Our factory stores have grown 3 times the amount, typos 5 times the amount, so they are growing massively, and our growth projection, as you can see, it's rapidly rising. Our store count for just last year, so we had 241 new stores open last year. Take away weekends and take away public holidays, that's a store a day. So it's massive, really, with what's going on and where the future holds. So just a basic region-based store count. So Australia, obviously, with the majority of the stores, but if you look at South Africa, we had 63 new stores pop up just last year. Some stats, so it created 243 jobs, with over 100 of those for Australia, 67 in South Africa, with a total of over 72,000 metres squared at an average of 300 metres squared per each store. They had 551 POSs, and almost half of those metres were of mega stores. So all those brands under one roof. The type of stores down the bottom, so our A-graders, so our biggest profit stores were, obviously we made 51, and then we had a sort of even spread for the rest, so B-grade stores, C-grade stores. Yeah, that's basically the history of where we're at so far. So all 9 brands, 12,000 stores across 16 countries, already expanding into more this year, and 19,000 people worldwide is under the Cotton On banner. It's pretty amazing, and they're a great company to work for, and who knows where we'll be by the end of this year, and let alone in the next few years, especially seeing the growth over the last 4 years alone. It's pretty exciting, and I guess it's a big thing for Nigel and Geelong to see that it's all originated here. So I guess I'll pass you back to Matt, and he can show how we use BIM in Cotton On.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, amazing story. I knew of Cotton On for a while, but none of those figures. So that's amazingly impressive. Certainly, I've known of Kane for a while. Kane's background, if he doesn't mind me saying, is a lot of retail design. So Parker Design, which do a lot of high commercial fit out and design, and Kmart. Now, obviously, you'd think that a company like Kmart and Coles would be heavily into BIM and these technologies, but they're really just scratching the surface. So Cotton On's done a great thing to grab someone like Kane and his team in, because you can see that they haven't got to 1,000 stores overnight without getting some clever people and some clever technology. And so I'll go through some of this as well, and certainly if I miss anything up, I'm sure Kane will correct me. But certainly I think this is where you can see the aspects of BIM that the GHD presentation showed, and really sort of focuses it onto one deliverable, which is obviously a retail store with many brands, but a similar ethos as to identifying store locations, identifying sizes of stores, how to fit them out, how to ensure some consistency. With 1,000 stores, it's not going to work if all the stores are unique and different and operate in different ways. So some of those economies of scale really applied to BIM extremely well. You can see the documentation, and obviously with multiple languages, the documentation is going to be clear enough to be able to be understood in various countries in various ways. And so, yeah, this is where BIM and that sort of visual modelling style is helping them extremely well. So some of these screens or screenshots If you can't quite read the detail, that's correct, because they're very commercial sensitive information. But basically this shot is just showing how the store planning team, as opposed to the designing team, are looking at demographics, looking at sort of how the stores are performing, the square area they've got available to them in different tenancies or different sites, working the best fit and how they're going to break that tenancy up into profitable items and what might be more popular in one area than the other. And all of that is being driven from that one model. So in the past, where you might have had, as Catherine was saying, different programs and SketchUp versus Excel versus back of napkin type stuff, it's all being driven by the Revit model. And all being driven into going into Excel spreadsheets, but utilising that data and feeding back in, and then very visually being able to show, in this case, the breakdown of apparel versus menswear versus kids versus other brands they might want to put into that one footprint. Again, with that visualisation process, to be able to communicate these ideas, not just from the design team into the store managing department who might be taking them over, council submissions, opening 1,000 stores, that requires a lot of planning permits and a lot of people to agree. This makes it very easy, and they know exactly what they're getting and how to roll that out. And even down to the level of 3D axonometrics of the building. You'll see, perhaps, you should just be able to see, call them clip strips, but the shelving brackets on the wall are actually at their location, so they know exactly how many shelves they can get, and they know exactly, crazy enough, someone like Kane would do this, how many T-shirts they can stack to that shelf on that area, and how they know how to lay the store out when they first get going. So incredibly clever. Now, I have been involved with both Coles and Woolworths in their sort of BIM adventures, and I don't think even they're at that point yet. I'm happy to be corrected, but the last time I know that Kmart were looking at implementing, and through the Coles company, through a program called SAP, which is an enormously robust and extremely expensive sort of planning tool, and they're still trying to work it out, I think, whereas the guys from Cotton have just got in and got it done, which is amazing. This hasn't always been the case. I mean, they were using a lot of Excel and a lot of other programs and a lot of CAD, but they purchased Revit 4-ish years ago, I think, from memory, and certainly needed someone like Kane to come in and just show them exactly what they could do with it. Kane admits that the first few goes they used Revit a lot like CAD, so basically it was CAD plus, and they really weren't utilising the I bit, which is the information. And now that's not unheard of. That's a lot of companies take on something like Revit and don't really sit back and think about all the different ways it can be used. And obviously a company as big as GHD, that takes a while as well to get all the ducks in a row. But certainly with only, I think, 8 people in your division, which I think it says down there, it's an incredible effort to get all of that information out, and only can be done in a tool utilising BIM, which is amazing. So a 2 to 3 day documentation time is incredible for any project, let alone the ones of this complexity. Obviously, there's a huge amount of reuse of as Catherine was saying, family files, and so they're like blocks. I'm assuming there's an enormous library that they've got of all the components. And then towards, once that's established, which takes a while, then basically it's sort of drag and drop to make sure that everything fits in within the area. Feeding that back into a design review process, making sure that all the managers are happy with that, branding changes and signage and everything can be driven from that model. So, incredible. 5 to 6 days for a mega store, which, with all the different brands and different componentry, is pretty impressive as well. Now, am I right that there's 10 in the Australian design team, but only 8 in the documentation team, or is that the same team?
Yeah, it's the crossover.
Yeah. Incredible. So you end up with sets of communication like this. Now, as Catherine alluded to, it would be lovely to think that everyone's working off iPads and can instantly create models and those sort of things on the field, but it's not quite there yet. So still a lot of it comes back to traditional 2D construction drawings or construction information, but all of that's informed by, I think we were saying before, a single point of truth. So everything's being driven by that one piece of information. So if there is a change, and invariably there are changes, they might get to a location and figure out it's not quite as big as they thought, or they might at the last second change it from a kid's store to a something else store. I'm making this up. They might not be that haphazard, but all of that can be. They are. Some things don't change. But they can quickly rejig it, change it. More than likely, they probably get access to the next tenancy, and they can say, "Hey, we can actually expand this now and make it a mega." So, and relatively, it's all there, which is incredible. And all of those, on purpose, some schedules on the side there are being driven from the model as well. So in the past, especially with retail tenancy, you might have engaged a store, a retail firm or a store planning firm who are using lots of Excel and lots of cut and paste clip art and everything like that. But all of that's disparate information. None of it's being driven by a single point, and all of that requires a huge amount of work to keep up to date. And invariably it's not, but in this case it is. There's also some other tricky things happening in the background. So the RMS tool was there before Revit, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's always been around.
Right, okay. So a lot of this information, and again, being a relatively new company in the scheme of things, obviously the founders have grabbed on some really good tools really early on. So RMS is, I guess, like a Excel or Access on steroids. With a lot of costing, componentry and ordering, sort of back-of-house information.
I suppose you can call it similar to SAP.
Oh, so it's a cheaper version of SAP, or yeah. So what Kane's been doing recently is working on including those codes into the family files and into the base data of the store planning. And then that can be, at this stage, exported out through Excel and then fed directly into that cost planning store database type tool. More and more, some of these linkers are being made directly into Revit. So you might see, for those of you who are utilising Revit, there's some plugins and some additional database tools that can actually drive this information directly from the model. So again, this is something that Cotton On would be looking at. And so rather than getting this export process and then into the tool, it can be a complete cycle, and also building back as well. So similar to what Catherine was saying about making sure that there's one database driving everything. This is a typical. This is the typical costs of a fit out, or a typical fit out, I guess, schedule. So looking at their all the shopfront glazing required, plasterboard required, the elements that you would need, and all of this gets costed, in this case, per country and per region, which would make sense. Do you actually source local material in some cases? So you'd have to...
So I've got a spreadsheet of all the data, of all the costs per country, per region.
Yep.
And every element, every wall finish, every fixture has a cost associated to it. So when we nominate what country it in, what region it is in, then that schedule changes accordingly, and then it's virtually doing a QA of the design.
Amazing. So yeah, the power of this being used, well, let's say for good, which is obviously because Cotton On have got the foundations and a lot of the other work they do, which is great as well. And an example of, again, uptake of new technologies, Trello. I've only just seen Kane just showed us on the iPad, but think of Evernote or some sort of planning or task-orientated system. So every team member has an account in this. It gets driven by tasks, colour coding as to who's involved and who's doing what, and it's all being fed live back to a system. And it's all, if you looked very closely at it, it's like a mini version of a Facebook chat. All the people's photos pop up. It tells you who's working on what. Incredible system, especially, obviously needed for managing 1,000 stores across half the world. Different time zones and different languages. It's a unique way of being able to collaborate. So again, a bit like a Revit server allows GHD to work across multiple time zones and regions. The tools like this are pulling that and allowing people to communicate across that as well. Evernote, which I mentioned before, again digitising, even meeting notes are digitised and located and linked back to the planning system. So some very clever uses of capturing information once and then reusing it where appropriate. So the use of BIM now is obviously at a design phase, and again from that initial understanding of what it will cost to get a store of this size in this location built. They can then look at expect time for delivery and start dates and opening dates. They're looking at the costings at different stages and verifying that against I guess a median cost of all the other stores and how that's sitting. The visual merchandising and the initial stock allocation from day one is all planned out. They know exactly how much will fit on the shelves, and I guess you've got an extremely limited back of house in most stores. They don't have a store.
Yeah, we just have a 10% rule space in our last space that's allocated to back of house, but yeah, we try to minimise back of house.
Yeah.
So we don't sell anything from back of house. But
Yeah, no, that's incredible. So it's obviously like a just-in-time ordering system. So that when something runs out, something is coming in the door at the same day. So if you ask if something's not in stock and you ask if there's got something out the back, they probably don't, because hopefully it's all on the floor. And obviously procurement and doing some mass deals. So Kane was telling me about you can imagine some of the ordering they do for 1,000 stores. Well, that invariably means that they get some very good pricing for things like store fit-outs and signage and all the things that go along with opening a retail store. And the suppliers, a little bit like what Catherine was saying with Lockwood, love it. They just get complete lists, guaranteed order. Here it comes. Amazingly easy B2B transactions of how these stuff is procured and rolled out. As Tim touched on before, a lot of it, and Charmaine and I went down there when we first put the idea to Kane to present. I had a look around. Yeah, there's some sensational presentation areas and the Cotton Uni and some teaching zones, and also some foundations that they've started up, Fifth Army being, I think, the most recent one, as well as some of the country sponsorship and those sort of things that they do, you'd be aware of. So this is where the door prizes are coming from the Fifth Army Foundation, which is part of a mental health charity fundraising awareness. So thank you for those, and a big thank you to Kane and Tim for being able to share that with us. Couldn't really share a huge amount more, as you can understand. I'm sure none of you are going to rush out and set up your own Cotton On store. But yeah, a lot of times this sort of presentations would be shrouded in secrecy, and I've tried to get other similar companies to present in the past, and they wouldn't be anywhere near it. So this is great that there's thankful to share amongst fellow Geelongians or Ballerinas. I just made that word up. What's been achieved, how they're doing it, and the sort of tools and techniques they're using, which is fantastic.